Good morning. My name is Jim Krzan, Vice President of Content for PMMI Media Group, publishers of Packaging World magazine. I'm your host today for our webinar, Recycling Crisis in America, which I'm proud to say has generated a record number of signups. Since Packaging World published the Field Guide to Sustainable Packaging back in 2007, we've provided extensive coverage of sustainable materials, as well as focused on the many CPGs, both large and small, who are redesigning their packages to be more environmentally friendly. Many CPGs, as you know, have set long-term goals to reduce carbon footprint, including changes in manufacturing and logistics, as well as packaging. Many of those goals include a key component using more post-consumer recycled content in their packaging. Hitting this target has been severely impacted by the recycling crisis. I should mention, Packaging World is owned by PMMI, the Association for Packaging and Processing. Even package machinery builders, PMMI members, have contributed to sustainable efforts, designing equipment with smaller footprint and energy-saving motors and more precise controls to reduce scrap. Each year, the Pack Expo show showcases many sustainable packaging success stories, and the show in Chicago this year featured a reusable packaging pavilion. As part of our ongoing coverage, our editorial team travels throughout the U.S. and Europe reporting on the latest developments in sustainability. It became clear about a year ago at a packaging sustainability event in Barcelona that regardless of any advancements in packaging, the entire collection and recycling infrastructure here in the U.S. is in a crisis. I saw our first guest, Michelle Hedlund, speak 6 months ago, and since then we have been working together to get Mitch and her simple solution to solving the crisis a broader platform within the packaging community. Mitch has more than 20 years experience in communications and branding for Fortune 500 companies, but back in 2010, she channeled her passion for improving the economic viability of recycling and closed-loop manufacturing to start Recycle Across America. Her simple yet effective standardized label solution has won an Ashoka Global Fellowship and has been referred to by the New York Times as one of the most important environmental and economic fixes taking root today. You will be shocked and delighted when you hear the long and impressive list of organizations who've already joined Recycle Across America. Mitch is a regular contributor to articles on recycling in Forbes, the New York Times, USA Today, and most recently, Packaging World. Later in our broadcast, Mitch will be joined by Sonika Malhotra, Global Brand Director for Love, Beauty, and Planet. Sonika worked with Unilever for 12 years before launching Love, Beauty, and Planet, combining her obsession for personal care with technologies and formulations that can have a positive impact on the planet. Mitch, I'm going to turn the reins over to you now, and I would like to remind our listeners that there will be time for questions after the webinar.
All right, Jim, thank you so much for the introduction and welcome everyone. Thank you for making the time today for our call. Hopefully, at a bare minimum, you walk away with a little enlightenment to an overall system and a story about that system that I don't think is often conveyed. So that's what I hope to deliver today, is showing kind of a deep dive about why recycling isn't working and how that's impacting CPGs that are trying to do more with their packaging to make it sustainable and to close the loop. I'm going to just walk through a few things. I'm going to go through the slides rather quickly. They're very visual, but I do have some content on there. After the webinar today, you will have a copy, you will be able to receive a copy, I should say, of this PDF if you request. And therefore, if you share it or if you review it afterwards, you'll see there's more written content on there as well. But I'll move through it quickly and rely on the visuals to help tell the story. The first thing that we're going to talk about is why should CPGs recycle and why should they close the loop with recycled commodities. The next thing we're going to talk about is what about recycling in the crisis and what's getting in the way of progress with recycling, what we're doing to solve it, and what are the opportunities for CPGs. I'm not going to go through all of these details, but I want to make the assumption that most of you already buy into why recycling is critical and why closed-loop manufacturing is also critical for the environment, for your brand, for the economy, and for waste in oceans. So again, I won't go into these details, but this is an overview of that when you receive the PDF. I want to warn you in kind of a lighthearted way that the beginning of my presentation isn't a feel-good. In fact, it might be a little uncomfortable because it's showing the real reality of why recycling is so complex and why it's too confusing for the public. But before we get started, at the end of it is where the feel-good comes in and where the hope comes in and all the opportunities for advancing brands and advancing recycling and closed-loop manufacturing and all the good things that can come from that. To get started, though, I do want to do a simple refresher about why recycling is so important. And I would challenge anyone globally to share an idea or an action by the general public that has a greater impact for climate change, for waste in oceans, for helping manufacturers, for helping the environment in general, for helping mitigate climate change, protecting fresh water, protecting resources, and to help consumers. Hands down, there is absolutely nothing that remotely compares to that collective benefit that recycling does. Solar is amazing, wind is amazing, all of those other clean energy opportunities are amazing. There's so much else that can be done in so many other categories. But when it comes to recycling, there isn't anything that compares to how this hits on so many notes to benefit everyone. But in order for this amazing action of recycling and closed-loop manufacturing to work, it requires on me and everybody else on this call and 320 million people in the U.S. to know what to do when they walk up to a bin and to do it relatively easily and quickly. On the next screen that you see right now, this is the way recycling looks to the public when they're outside of their home. And I like to say that I didn't pick these ugly pictures. This is just pictures that we take of what recycling truly looks like to the public. So despite it being the number one thing we can do for our species and for the environment collectively and for preventing waste and going into oceans and to help all of you CPG brands as well, this is the way that recycling is presented to the public outside of the home. This is what residential recycling program labels look like on carts. So that confusion also contributes to the fact that it just feels incredibly confusing. And to be honest, it leads people to believe that it must not be that important if it's this confusing. You know, if we took the same approach with road safety that we take with recycling, this is just a little handful of what stop signs might look like. So what's happening with recycling right now in the public is that every single business, every airport, every school, and I mean every single literal building or sometimes an office within a building or a retailer within a mall, every single retailer within that mall or the businesses is having to figure out how to label their bins themselves. And as a result of that, there are literally hundreds of thousands of different looking labels on bins throughout society. And it's causing millions of tons of garbage going into recycling bins every day. So ultimately, all that confusion at the bin and everyone having to reinvent their own signs for the labels for the bins throughout the whole U.S. is causing the general public, 320 million people, to be confused, to be apathetic, and to even be skeptical of recycling. And that's leading to highly contaminated recycling, whether it's in public spaces or whether it's in residential carts. These are just tags of OOP stickers and contaminated labels on residential carts. They're happening throughout the U.S. right now. And it's just letting you know that, again, even at the home, recycling isn't working in many communities. And this reaction is a very expensive and really unsafe reaction to the contamination issue. Haulers are getting out of their trucks. Sometimes they're looking in the bins, sometimes they're not. And sometimes they're just slapping a contaminated label on a bin. And there's all sorts of problems with that from a safety level, from an economic level for that hauler, and the perception from the public that every bin is starting to be labeled contaminated and going straight to the landfill is adding to the collapse of recycling. So I point out the tags because that's not a solution, it's just a reaction, and it has some problems with it. Basically, recycling is collapsing in the U.S. today. When I first started clipping little news clippings to help prove that, I created this little collage. Now I could probably put 50 times more clippings on there, but I like to use this one still because when I first put it on, it was mentioning that California has 200 recycling plants that have shut down. Since then, many more are shut down. There's 1,000 recycling centers and processing plants in California alone that have shut down. So it is truly collapsing. People want to say, okay, it has to be because of the mixed recycling, the trend to single stream or single sort. That's why recycling doesn't work. Although mixed recycling is not the best scenario, it is what is happening across the U.S. right now, and the infrastructure is in place and heavily invested in. So it's not something that's going to reverse easily or quickly anytime soon. However, recycling, putting all the recyclables in a bin together really isn't the reason for recycling to collapse. It's not the best case scenario, but if the public were doing it properly, it would work. There are some downfalls that can be worked around that haven't been implemented yet with mixed recycling that would protect the porous materials and to protect the glass. So if recycling works, there are ways to even improve mixed recycling for the paper, cardboard, and glass elements of that as well. So again, I'm kind of debunking the fact that this is all mixed recycling's fault. Not a great scenario that we have mixed recycling. However, if it's done properly throughout the U.S. and throughout the communities that are using it, it can work. It can be refined upon, but it can work. Is recycling failing because of confusing labels on packaging? That contributes to it, definitely. The public never really learned what those numbers meant. They are trying to do the right thing, but from one package to the next, the information might be different. But again, it's actually not as much of the information on the packaging as it is as what happens at the bin and what's allowable. So on some of the packaging, there might be a number 5 that is marked at the bottom with a chasing arrow, and the public is only reading the chasing arrow. And if they look at the bin and there's just a chasing arrow on that bin, then they'll throw it in there. But the recycling processor may not accept that number 5 or number 7 or number 6. So it makes things complex for sure, but it also is not the reason why recycling is collapsing. And I also want to point out right now that on another call, we can do a deep dive if PMMI is interested in talking about compostables. That's an entire subject of itself that we have vast knowledge on and opinions on and data on. So I'm not going to get into that. We're just going to stick with consumer recyclables that are more traditional items in this call. So some of you are now using the How to Recycle label, and that is helpful. I think it can be helpful. But again, if it's giving you information on the packaging and you can't see what is truly accepted in that bin based on the rules of the recycling processor in that community, it may not help. So what happens on the bin needs to clearly share what needs to go into that bin based on what is accepted by that community's recycling facility. In this case, you can see the empty and place cap back on the plastic bottle. That's the instruction. That's on a lot of beverage containers, for instance. In some communities in the U.S., they can't accept caps on the bottles. Many can, but many can't. So even that can be confusing. But we're going to go through that in a little bit. I used this screen because I want to share something for our imagination for just a moment. You know, imagine that all car manufacturers really believe that road safety is important, and I believe that they probably do. But now imagine if we opened it up so that every car manufacturer could actually design a sign for the roads to talk about child safety at school crossings or railroad crossings or speed limits or stop signs. Or what if we really opened that up for every car manufacturer to actually create all of our road signs? That almost seems too crazy to even really envision. It would not work. We would all deal with safety issues. There would be issues with distribution and economics throughout the U.S. if people couldn't drive safely, if things were so confusing. It simply would not work. But I'm going to skip forward. But this is what's happening in recycling. And I need to put a caveat here and say that this isn't a shame game. I'm not trying to shame any brand or anyone in the industry. I'm just trying to point out the reality of what is also contributing to the confusion. Is it has become a brand war or a branding platform. And in the end, these companies that have really, really great intention to collect more recyclables are actually adding to the confusion. So I think internally in some CPG companies, there might even be a little bit of a head knocking against the other head between brand and sustainability sometimes. And it's not only defeating their sustainability efforts, but it's also sometimes, I think, affecting their brand. And I want to point out something that many of you, if you're larger CPG companies that are publicly held, are experiencing. This isn't just something that the consumers are putting pressure on or that your own company feels some pressure on. There is a major, major movement, and this has been going on for about 10 years, where watchdog groups such as You Sow, they're aggregating your shareholders to apply pressure on your companies to do more. And this is just an example of some of those companies and some of the headlines from As You Sow. So As You Sow did a press release saying PepsiCo Foundation announces a recycling challenge, but commitment unlikely to move the needle. Because this is the way those efforts go. And in the end, it might look good and feel good, but it's not helping move the needle. I also want to point out the whole Starbucks comment as well from As You Sow, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. I'm pointing that out for a reason right now, but you'll find out in a little bit. So again, great intentions, I believe great intentions, but in the end, we're seeing not much progress because it's just adding to the confusion for the public. Coca-Cola just announced that they released 1 million recycling bins into the U.S. If you look, well, and this one is actually backwards, so excuse that, but again, 1 million more bins of confusion means more confusion and more garbage and more recycling not working. So great intentions. The image on the left, I wanted to point out, that was at a Coca-Cola announcement, and you can see that even in that photo, there's confusion about, as far as where bottles go and what whole means what. So if anybody has seen this, wonderful. If not, we're going to share it with you after the presentation today. But Ellen recently did a little segment on her show about going to Starbucks. And ultimately, she was pointing out the label and the bin in the center and the one on the right showing it's just too confusing for people to be able to recycle right. And she is actually asking businesses to start implementing the right program for their businesses so there's less confusion. In the end of all of that confusion and recycling not working, the public doesn't believe that recycling, as much as they absolutely love it, they don't believe that these materials are actually valuable. So they get littered, they get blown into storm drains, and they end up in the ocean or on beaches. These photos are not from an underdeveloped country. These photos are from our own shores. And no brand wants to see their logo floating in the ocean on the beach. You are not the villains of this story, but you are perceived as the villains of this story. And there is an easy way to fix it and change that perception, which is what we're just about to talk about. So these half-truths, they're going to be available for you later on the PDF that you can read through. So I'm not going to read through them. This slide I am going to share with you, though, because a lot of people say, boy, we just need more education about recycling. And I say, no, we don't. And here's why. All of us went through driver's ed at 15 or 16, and we learned everything we needed to know about road safety, every indicator. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different indicators, and we learned them. And since then, we have all gotten in our cars and been able to drive anywhere we want to across the U.S. without thinking about those elements ever again. And we never have to go through road safety class and driver's ed again. So we need to get past this belief that we just have to keep reinventing the wheel and that we have to try and educate our way out of this. Education will not work if it continues to be as confusing as it is. So we benefit from standardizations every day of our lives, including using this technology today, or hopping on the flight that you're about to catch, or driving on the road you're about to drive, or buying the product you're about to buy for nutritional reasons, or if you're going into surgery. You benefit from industries coming together and introducing kind of non-negotiable standards. So we really need to do that with recycling. It is truly the number one thing we can do for our species and to help you as manufacturers and to prevent waste from going into oceans. Creating a strong recycling culture is the number one thing that can be done to prevent waste going into oceans. Switzerland is the best recycling country right now, and they have the least amount of litter. That is not a coincidence. And when there's less litter, there's less waste in oceans. The labels that you see right here is just a few of them that are available that are standardized labels based on what sorting needs are required. There is actually a standardized label for every one of those instances. So if you imagine speed limit signs being different from one road to the next, speed limits being very different, the way that they're presented is in a very uniformed way with the same set of standards. So we know how to change our speed limit from one road to the next without thinking much about it. Even if recycling programs are different from one community to the next or one recycling company to the next, if it's presented in a standardized format, it allows people to recycle right. And we do have Recycle Across the World standardized labels as well, but I won't go through that. The basis of the standardized labels were modeled after best in practice, using some of the best in practice methods that San Francisco is using and using some of the best in practice methods that European countries are using when materials need to be separated. So that was some of the methodology of the standardized labels. I won't go into the deep dive of really how it's all set to be. We do have states that are now using the standardized labels and rolling it out throughout the entire state, Rhode Island being the first. They don't have the labels throughout the entire state yet, but where they do, they have one recycling facility for the whole state, and they've already seen about a 20% reduced rejected truckloads. So that's how much contamination is improving in their state already. They won the Gold Excellence Award for their Let's Recycle Right campaign, which is essentially our campaign, but they branded it for their state. We have counties getting on board using the labels. We have cities and towns, smaller towns, larger cities getting on board. We have neighborhoods getting on board. In Winter Park in Florida, just outside of Orlando, within the first month, they saw a 58% increase in their residential recycling levels. Also, I'm sorry, I don't know if my button's working here or not, but schools are also receiving standardized labels donated to them. Orlando K-12 schools receive standardized labels from Bank of America. The labels were installed at all of the schools, and within the first year, the recycling levels increased 90% at that school. And keep in mind, they did have a recycling program before. This was just a switch out of standardized labels on bins, and they saved $370,000 in trash hauling fees in their first year for one school district. And again, the labels were given to them by Bank of America. We have airports getting on board. Within the first week of using the standardized labels on the bins at Minneapolis International Airport, their recycling increased 45%, and they did see a reduction in contamination as well. We have other airports now getting on board. Orlando, the busiest airport in the world, which is Atlanta, the Port Authority airports are also getting on board as well, including JFK and LaGuardia and some others. University of Denver and many universities are getting on board throughout the U.S. Altogether, we have about 9,000 K-12 schools and universities in the U.S. now using the labels. I like to use this example, University of Denver, because the now sustainability director for the city of Atlanta headed up the program when he went to school there. He and I had never met each other. We didn't know of each other, but they reported that they had a 90% increase in their recycling, or they reduced their contamination 90% and nearly doubled their recycling levels once the labels were installed. The labels are now being used at stadiums. US Bank Stadium implemented the labels. Their recycling levels, once it was implemented, almost quadrupled. They went from about 24% up to 83%, and they went from contaminated bins with hot dogs and beer and all sorts of things that don't belong to nearly zero contamination. That led them to be the first ever zero waste Super Bowl in history. And they say, quote unquote, the standardized labels played a critical role in them reaching that achievement. Now Mercedes-Benz Stadium has just installed the labels, preparing them for Super Bowl, and they will be using those labels going forward as well. So we're very excited to see the impact of that. To one up Minneapolis, Atlanta is doing more than just implementing the labels in the airport and in the stadium. They are starting to implement the labels on street corners. They are preparing to implement the labels on all their residential carts. The labels are already used at their schools. Delta is now implementing the labels in their corporate headquarters, so is UPS. So they're showing it's not just at the stadium. We're going to make it easy for people to recycle right wherever they are in Atlanta. The standardized labels are being introduced at the national parks. They have been used for 2 years in 3 pilot parks, Denali, Yosemite, and Grand Teton, with amazing success. I like to accentuate that because these are people that are coming from all over the world, millions of them, and all over the country, and their recycling levels are increasing dramatically, sometimes 2 and 3 times more, and reduction in contamination is significant. Subaru introduced us to the national parks, which led to the labels getting on the parks, which led to schools outside of the parks starting to use the labels, which led to the counties outside of the parks now starting to use the labels, which has led to Aramark, which services the parks, starting to use the labels, which led to counties and colleges and universities. And now it's rolling out nationally with the national parks. I ramble on this one because I want to demonstrate how viral this becomes. So it's not just one entity implementing the labels, but they see the benefit in the whole system starting to improve around their community and beyond. I'm not going to go through these testimonials, but they're there for you if you'd like to read them. They're wonderful. We are all about fixing the system. We are not just about a label or a sign. We are about fixing the entire system. So we have now partnered with 7 of the leading bin manufacturers in North America, and we have a couple more that are coming on board so that the labels can be kitted on the bins before they ship. A huge benefit to companies that are trying to create recycling programs is to know that the labels can be kitted, their specific labels, what they need, can be kitted on their bins before they receive them. We're working with property management groups and facility groups to make sure that the custodial ends of businesses are also getting on board and understand what's happening. We work with the MRFs and the processors before we start implementing the labels on residential carts to make sure that those labels specifically identify what can go in those residential carts. And then we have a whole bunch of other tools that we provide to cities as well, including mayor engagement in the Let's Recycle Right PSA campaign. So as a city gets on board, they have all those tools that go to them for free. This is just an example of some brands on board. And now I'm going to jump in and just share with you quickly the kind of fun sizzle part. So it's great to have a solution that we're witnessing is working with national adoption. But the next challenge is, how do we let the U.S. know that help is on its way, that we are going to start making it easier for the public to start recycling right wherever they are. We're going to provide recycling tips, but most importantly, we are also going to start sharing with them that standardized labels are starting to come their way to make it easier for them to recycle right. So we started the Let's Recycle Right campaign. We have really officially launched it just recently. We didn't have the bandwidth for as long as we've had a lot of these assets. We didn't have the bandwidth to grow it super fast before because our team was just too small. But right now, the TV commercials are running in 40 of the largest cities on ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox on many of those major networks in those cities. It's more than 40 major cities. And the TV commercials are running during prime time, not just at 3 o'clock in the morning. They're running during NFL games. They're running during Good Morning America. This solution and this campaign has gained wild acceptance, and we're so excited about it. It's also led to full-page ads running in amazing magazines, including this issue this month of In Style with J-Lo on the cover. That's a full-page ad that's about $250,000 just for that page, just for that month, that is totally donated to us. And the ads are starting to run in really strategically placed publications. And again, these are full-page ads. Family Circle, I think, is about $380,000 for one page for 1 month. And we have a full-page ad that's going in there. Forbes as well, National Geographic, Packaging World, thank you so much. And the ads are also starting to be seen in the airports that are getting on board. Those ads are 20 feet, one of them is 28 feet wide. These are massive ads showing the new face of recycling. So we have about 40 different celebrities that are on board in the campaign. But in addition to the celebrities and musicians, etc., we also have now congressmen, lieutenant governors, secretaries of state, mayors, global sustainability executives, CEOs, and we have our first mayor that's just about to be photographed as well for this campaign as they're working on a state rollout. In addition to that, the standardized labels are being used at the NFL headquarters, the NHL headquarters, and soon at the NASCAR headquarters. And as a result of that, we have amazing athletes that are now getting on board with the PSA campaign from all sorts of sporting industries. They really believe this needs to happen everywhere. We have super cool, youthful heroes as well. This is Red Gerard. He is the 2018 snowboard gold medalist, and he is super anxious and excited to be part of this campaign and to fix recycling. His town of Breckenridge and now Vail, Aspen, Vail Resorts, all of those ski resorts are now starting to implement the standardized labels. And that he can take credit for some of that. That's the influence of all of this. To go a little bit younger, but equally as passionate, if not more, this is a big one. Some of you who have been following recycling might know of a young man by the name of Ryan Hickman. I say he's a man because he kind of is, despite the fact at 3.5 he had his own recycling company. He is now 9, and he has recycled about 500,000 cans and bottles. He will be at that number in the next month or so. And he's been on Ellen. He's a CNN hero. He has 200 million worldwide views of his assets. And his dad and he reached out to us when they saw our ads with Kristen Bell and said, can we be part of this movement? And so now Ryan, and we're thrilled about this, is now part of the Let's Recycle Right campaign. And he is going to start becoming a spokesperson for this mission because he knows we need to get to the point where everybody can recycle just like Ryan. And there's no way to do that if it's confusing for everyone. He just spoke last week at We Day up in Vancouver. He spoke to 23,000 kids who are ready to change the world. Bank of America has just donated. They just contacted us. They've been a huge supporter of our mission for years. They just contacted us and said that they want to donate $250,000 to Recycle Across America to provide more standardized labels to K-12 schools. As a result of that, we are naming this current round of funding the Ryan Hickman Let's Recycle Right grant for K-12 schools to help students in schools recycle right and save money, and to really create a culture where everyone can recycle just like Ryan. We're thrilled to say that we received that funding, the $250,000 from Bank of America, and those labels, hundreds of thousands of them have been or are going out now to K-12 schools. To date, we have nearly 1 million standardized labels donated to K-12 schools. We have something incredibly exciting that I can't share with you, but we are about to turn up the volume on this campaign even more, and we'll share that at a later time. So just to summarize, we are not a label company. We are a nonprofit organization that just can't stand the confusion anymore. And I started this mission 8 years ago because it just seemed obscene that something so important would be done so poorly. But we're not just a standardized label solution. We are trying to fix the entire system by getting cities on board, states on board, counties on board, schools, colleges, businesses, CPG brands, residential programs, partnering with bin companies, doing media and doing the PSA campaign, engaging high-profile events in the process, engaging retailers such as Office Depot, which is the first to start offering the standardized labels right now, and they're running the ads on Weather Channel, etc., and helping to kind of get back to the basics in this country so that recycling works for all of you, so that you can get these materials back and really act on your great intentions. So what are brands doing when they join? This is just some ideas if you're all thinking, what can we do to be involved in this? Brands are starting to use the standardized labels within their businesses, within their operations, their facilities. We do have zero waste labels as well that take care of industrial type materials. But this is something that they're using in their offices, cafeterias, hallways, and their distribution centers and warehouses, etc., manufacturing as well. They are donating labels to K-12 schools. I shared that with you. There are some cities that are rolling out the standardized labels that have asked for help to have labels donated for their residential carts. So there are some companies now that are stepping up to do that, which is a huge win. And in some of these instances with cities, they will allow a logo to be on the standardized label, which would be on all of the residential carts in their communities. The standardized labels are being donated to K-12 schools. It's a game changer. And labels are being donated to national parks, just like what Subaru has done. And another way that brands can get involved, that they can start being part of the Let's Recycle Right for Trash-Free Waters campaign. As I said, we're stepping up the campaign pretty seriously and in a really fun way that I can't share with you yet, but that is an option as well. So I'm going to just sign off, but I want just one thing to be said. This is one of our team members with Recycle Across America, and we wrote this up, that this is not an introduction to the next generation. This is an introduction to the new generation. They are feisty and they're determined to make the world a better place, and they're going to do it, and they want it to happen fast. They don't need any more awareness campaigns. They're fully aware. They want to see more unity to fix issues because they know that the greater sum will get it done. They're having more options than ever to choose solution-driven brands. They aren't just consumers, they are influencers. And with that, I do hold the greatest hope for the future. This is where change comes from. And this is the perfect segue to introduce you to Sonika from Love Beauty Planet, because they are a great example of who is pulling that all together. So Sonika, I turn this over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mitch. I will not take too much time, but I think there was never a perfect or a better moment to tackle this issue. Of course, on the one side, we may think it's a very dire issue, which it is. However, the awareness, which was pretty much non-existent a few years ago, has increased so much, and we see millennials and young people raising their hands and saying, what is it that we can do about it, and also tell us what the issue is. So I think together with awareness and all of the efforts that we are looking at, one of them that Mitch talks about through her awesome organization. So with that, I want to introduce the brand Love Beauty and Planet. We launched this brand early in 2017, January of 2017, and the brand was built by a group of very passionate people who believed in selling more than just a product, which is build it with purpose at its heart, and that's what we've tried to do. So on the next slide, the brand, like I said, was built with purpose at its heart, and I think everything we do, from the way the product is brought to market and how we communicate about it, how we build formulations to packaging, everything is centered around our brand purpose. So in one line, how we lay out our brand's purpose is that we are committed to acts of love, to small acts of love, if anything, that make our planet a little more beautiful every day. So it's not getting to that perfection and waiting for years and years to get to that final destination. Every small effort in totality adds up. So what we've done is we sort of assessed everything along the value chain of our brand and our products, and tried to build a brand which is more sustainable, more environmentally friendly through all of these small acts of love. So yes, this is a journey, and it's going to continue. It's not perfect just yet, but we feel we are on a very solid start. So on the next slide. The brand is built with two key principles, and it's the most relevant piece of it is firstly sustainability by design. And since this was a new brand, we had the opportunity to embed purpose at its heart and not consider it as an afterthought or a separate thing. The brand is the purpose, and the purpose is the brand. So we have two key principles: sustainability by design, and the second one is the entire value chain. Under sustainability by design, we tackled three different pillars, which is reducing waste, reducing water, and reducing greenhouse gases. Of course, for today's purpose, I will focus on reducing waste because this is why we are here. The second pillar is the value chain, which is having the intel and information to understand your entire value chain and the impact you have on the environment across each of the stages of your value chain, and then finding ways and means to minimize that impact. So that's our second pillar. And as we are assessing each and every element of the value chain, the challenge we pose to ourselves, again, layering our commitment for the planet on top of it, is the challenge we pose to ourselves is what is it that we can do that makes our product less wasteful, use less water, reduce greenhouse gases. And so on to the next slide. When it comes specifically to waste, we are aiming to keep waste out of landfills. Fact is that we are a brand that sells shampoos, conditioners, body washes, lotions in plastic bottles. That's the reality. That's the way consumers can get it. That's the way you can make the product affordable for them. So that is true. However, we always have a choice. We have a choice of one, creating new plastic in the world, or using plastic that already pre-exists. So our packaging is one of the biggest focus point for us as we were assessing this value chain that I was talking about. And the aim with our packaging is to keep waste out of landfills. So moving on to the next slide. Our packaging bottles are made with 100% recycled materials, which means we are not using virgin plastic to create any of these bottles. In addition to that, the bottles are 100% recyclable. So in a way, this is a loop, and we prevent materials from ending up in landfill. We aim to use recycled materials wherever possible. We haven't been able to crack the PCR on our caps, but that's fine. It's on our roadmap, and hopefully very soon we'll be able to crack that as well. But there is a need to reduce petrochemical-based materials, and through our bottles we're able to do that. Our bottles are also 100% recyclable. We work on our packs to make them as recyclable as possible, ensuring that the pack can be reused or recycled to have another life. And between this recycled and recyclable, like I said, we're able to close the loop and prevent additional plastic from being created in the world. Moving on to the next slide. Like I said, our goal is to close this loop on plastic where packaging has an infinite lifespan. So other than building the brand the way we are trying to, I think for us it's been a learning process. For this small team that works on the brand, we have tried to educate ourselves, oftentimes with partners like Mitch herself, understanding the direty of the problem, understanding what it means to have a plastic, what's the lifespan of different types of plastic. So yes, this plastic has a really, really, really long, infinite lifespan, and so it's important to close the loop. And how are we doing it? Like I said, through recycled plastic, also making the bottles recyclable. But then we as brands have the opportunity to be megaphones for our consumers. We have the ability to do just a simple advertisement of our product, or instead communicate to the consumers and incite their small acts of love for the planet, create awareness amongst those consumers for these small acts that they can take. And so as part of our communication efforts, we are encouraging consumers to recycle packs every time, but also recycle them right. And also recycle them everywhere. For example, we know that recycling is probably easier when the trash can is in your kitchen or around your living room. However, recycling from the bathroom is not something that we see very commonly, and consumers use a shampoo bottle of face cream and they just put it in the little bin they have in the bathroom, but that doesn't get recycled as much. And so with those small insights, we're able to create bite-sized content in millennial speak to create this language and almost collect this movement of small acts from a lot of people who want to make a difference, just don't know how. Moving on to the next slide. Yes, so I have spent a lot of time talking about our recycled bottles, but more specifically, our bottles are made from transparent plastic called PET. When we take such decisions about doing something a little differently or a little bit more responsibly, there are certain calls or trade-offs that we have to make. So for example, using recycled materials in a transparent PET bottle means that you have to accept a grayish bluish tint in your bottle. Now, as a beauty brand, it was very scary that we are selling a bottle which has a little gray-blue tint. But that said, when we as a team looked at what our North Star was, we felt it was the right decision. And so we did eventually go with bottles that weren't pristinely transparent, but we felt it was the right thing to do. And I think consumers understand and reward you for the same thing. So every bottle also looks different. The color hue varies because the plastic is not consistent. But I think it was the right thing to do and important to the brand. Moving on. The other thing that we've tried to do is a unique labeling technology. It's called the Clean Flake label technology. A lot of times labels don't come off from your transparent PET bottles, and therefore a Clean Flake label technology ensures that when it gets into the recycling facility and the caustic solution hits the bottle, the label comes off very easily, and so the plastic is actually usable and actually recycled. So this labeling technology it's a small piece, again, one of the small acts of love for the planet, but we feel very good about it, and we are trying to take it wider across the company as well, that this label comes off easily in the recycling facility but doesn't come off in the shower where the products are kept. So what you see on the screen right now is a visualization of how this label works in the recycling facility. So some of the biggest barriers to recycling for consumers, of course, lack of infrastructure goes without saying. We know all of the materials that goes for recycling isn't really recycled, so we do understand that. Consumers don't see the benefit and get confused. That's another barrier. Consumers don't understand why recycling is important. This is maybe more true for a certain set of consumers, maybe not for all, and it's changing dramatically now. However, there is still a lot of confusion. Mitch hit on some of that confusion that comes when you approach a recycling bin, but a lot of it is prevalent even when when it's more upstream than that. And so how are we able to get over some of these barriers? One, clear pack instructions, and Mitch did talk about how to recycle, so that is very much a part of our pack as well. Organizations like Recycle Across America are working a lot through public service announcements, and engagement of engagement of consumers to create this awareness. So that's the other way we can do it. And like I mentioned, brands like ourselves always have the benefit to do the same, which is create awareness about how recycling is important and how it can be done. Moving on. So I want to end on this note, which is Love, Beauty and Planet has partnered through Ashoka, which is our partner organization, and managed to work with Alexa, who is a national outreach director at Recycle Across America. Why Alexa? Alexa is one of the few girls that we are supporting. It's because we do want to, have people like Alexa inspire many Alexas across the world and the country when they have small ideas or big ideas that can effectively change the world. How do we make those small efforts actually actionable and make a difference? So we are very excited about having someone like Alexa and Jessica work with us to create more of an inspiration for a lot of those change makers that have ideas and are probably afraid to bring them out. So very excited about that partnership. So with that was my last slide. I'm very excited to be joining this webinar, and hopefully the examples I shared from Love, Beauty and Planet are good and inspiring for some of you hearing it. Like I said, we are on an honest and transparent journey. We are perfect somewhere. Some places we are far from perfection, but it's about continuing to make the effort, because every effort counts. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonika, so much, and thank you, Mitch. And now we're going to have a little bit of time. We can go an hour, so we've got about 7 minutes for a few questions. Instead of taking a specific question, the first one is more about the economics. With new prime plastic prices sinking, cost of recycling increasing, trucks and labor, how will that huge economic barrier ever be overcome without any kind of regulation? And that's why we're talking about a standardized way of doing this. But we note that the U.S. plastic recycling rate is dropping because the economics are so bad, and now even exports aren't an option sometimes. What is the financial? And Sonika and Mitch, you might both want to talk about of doing something that may be more difficult and is still more expensive, or is that changing?
Well, I'll jump in just from our perspective. The the beginning of the domino of recycling not working and being in crisis and collapsing and becoming extremely expensive is where is the first point of recycling, which, we've talked about already, about the consumer and public experience when they walk up to a recycling bin. So if that doesn't work, major domino effect of recycling becoming expensive and not viable. So it's important to note that, because we can all take the sound bites that are coming out in the media that it's too expensive, or that China doesn't want to buy the recycling and international markets have changed. The reality is that the public's throwing garbage in the recycling bin, period. That's it. That's all that the real reality is. That's called contamination, which is bringing down the house. The best thing that we can do to start reversing all of that and to start making recycling affordable and the commodities of high quality, great quantity, and competitive with virgin commodities, the best thing that we can do as a united force of CPG brands and cities and communities and brand leaders, etc., is to actually fix that first point, because there's an autocorrect that will start to happen. So in the meantime, that needs to be sped up, which is why we're really stepping up our game right now and doing a lot more and doing it a lot louder. But in the meantime, the industry and the CPG brands need to continue to communicate that they want these materials back, that there is truly a demand, because some of the sound bites also make it sound as if, well, there's just no demand for these materials either. So you've got a bad feedstock and you have no demand. And so what we do when we speak is to say there is demand of good quality material at competitive prices. There isn't demand for highly contaminated materials that are super expensive to process to pull out all the contamination.
Okay, thank you. And that leads to our next question is that how is this mission helping this closed loop? How your listeners hear how the labels will help them with this closed loop manufacturing.
Yeah. So two things. Everyone who is a CPG brand is somewhat held hostage, or maybe that's not a good term, but somewhat held based on what the public is doing when they walk up to the bin and what the recycling industry is doing about recycling. When the recycling industry switched to mixed recycling, they made that decision and you all had to deal with it. So in a way, the CPG industry is often kind of having to go where the recycling industry is taking them. We have the ability as a unified society, and again with mayors and governors and brand leaders, et cetera, to start pushing the envelope and saying we do want standardized labels throughout the U.S. so that the public can recycle right wherever they are, which then changes things. So it's something that the brands can reach out to us and to Sonica and to others, but with our organization, they can reach out to us to find out how can they have a stronger voice. If the CPG brands get on board in a big way on something like this, it can make it happen almost instantly. It can really
so that's the final kind of group of questions is how exactly do they find out more about this right now after we are finished today?
Yeah. So everyone's email address is on this final screen, and we welcome everyone to reach out and ask their questions. I believe Jim and the other coordinators for this webinar will also send out an email that provides the PDF of this presentation, but also shows some videos, and then maybe next steps for any CPG brand that's interested in getting on board. This is a little bit like an opportunity for the Got Milk campaign, for the milk industry to come together and say, let's communicate out what we need to happen. Ultimately, everything that's being decided is affecting what you, the real users of these materials, actually need. And this solution, this campaign has the ability to actually turn that around where you can help change what happens at the bin. You can change where the pricing goes now that their contamination is reduced. It's a bit of an EPR program without being a forced EPR program. And it's a public way, and we'll be doing this with the Let's Recycle Right campaign for trash-free waters. We'll be doing this in a way to show which brands are leading this mission to make it easier for the public to start recycling right wherever they are. We are going to be out front and center.
Excuse me, but we've reached our hour limit here, but we want to thank everyone for joining, and you can continue on with your questions, and they will go both to Mitch and Sonika. And stay tuned for promotion for the next Packaging World webinar. Thank you all very much.